Welcome, and it's a pleasure to be with you back. I'm going to try just to adjust a few things before I begin my keynote. Um, this is as a result of us dropping from the last keynote, and hopefully this will be recorded so we'll be able to share it as widely as possible. The conference that you have, the Psychology of the Global Crisis, State Surveillance, Solidarity, and Everyday Life, is a timely and an important conference. This is done jointly by a number of institutions, including the American University of Paris. So this is really a very timely engagement on a topic that is still unfolding as we speak. Also, I would like to thank my dear friend, Robert Bishara, who made this possible, immediately connecting with me to offer a keynote address to the conference on this topic. I'm going to be focusing my talk on Islamophobia in the age of the COVID-19 pandemic, xenophobia, racism, and shifting the blame. Broadly speaking, my work has often been focused on racism, Islamophobia, critical race theory, decolonization, also interrogating and engaging the longue array of Muslim history, but going all the way back to the 14th, 15th century, and moving to the modern period. So my talk today will touch on a few key concepts and few key elements that hopefully we'll benefit from in this ongoing conversation. So this really a work in progress. A full paper on this will be coming. These are initial observations, initial engagement with the topic. Since really as a social scientist and also as a historian, that we need to really look at the evidence, the documents, possibly do some survey and engage in a variety of source collection in order for us to come into as educated of a conclusion as possible at this particular time. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully that will get us into to follow through as I'm beginning to speak. So again, this is the conference. It's online and free. It's over a number of days, and each day an engagement of a number of talks, discussions, meeting between speakers on a global level. And this connects to the work on Islamophobia, the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project, and the center that I lead, that has been really connecting scholars, researchers across the globe, from Japan to Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, India, and most of Europe, some parts of the Middle East, as well as North Africa, US and Canada. Also the work that I do feeds into the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and hopefully some of the participants in this conference will offer their papers for consideration for the Islamophobia Studies Journal. So again, this is just to get us xenophobia, racism, and shifting the blame. I always like to begin with Martin Luther King's statement that he put out in the later part of his life, 67, 68, just a few months before his death. Martin Luther King, I think still people underestimate the depth of his both philosophical understanding as well as a critique of the American society. I do recommend for anyone that have not listened or read Martin Luther King's speech, The Three Evils of Society. I think it is still as timely today and as accurate as the time that Martin Luther King delivered the speech. The only possible changes will be on the figures and the numbers, not on the exact content. But Martin Luther King says, quote, cowardice as the question, is it safe? Expediency as the question, is it politic? Vanity as the question, is it popular? But conscious as the question, is it right? And on some positions, it is necessary for the moral individual to take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because it is right. So engaging and challenging Islamophobia, we do it because it's right. Challenging racism and the constant targeting of African Americans, we do it because it's right. Targeting the immigrants and those that are marginalized, we speak and defend their rights because it is the right thing to do. As you know, it is not popular sometimes, and it might not get you into what you call, quote, polite company. But I will take real company to the possibility of polite company anytime. This is my preference. I try to do my work and connect it to the people. I like to work on applied research and touch and connect what I do in terms of my work into the needs, hopes, aspiration, and future horizons of people on the ground. Now, Islamophobia in terms of definition, I have two definitions that I operate. By no means they're the last words on the subject. There's now over 20 plus definitions for Islamophobia. And that's actually points to the maturation of the field, that we actually could speak of the emergence of the Islamophobia studies field. And there are a number of individuals, centers, and researchers that their work is focused on this field. I do try to specifically mention my colleague Salman Sayed in Leeds University, Jasmine Zain in Toronto, as well as others that continue to work in there, David Miller also in the UK. And again, I don't want to get into whom I forgot, but we do have a considerable level of engagement in the Islamophobia studies field, and there are a variety of contributors as we speak. In 2009, as I began to work on putting together the Islamophobia research and documentation project, this was the guiding definition that I worked with. Islamophobia is a structural organizing principle that sits at the present racial crossroads and employed to rationalize and extend the dominant global power alignment while embarking on a project for silencing the collective global other. For me, what was important is, rather than focus on the Muslimness or the Islamic part, is to actually focus on what is it that we are actually experiencing. In essence, in here to think that racialization or racial marker is constructed by power structure that begins to point at the target of this racialization or the racial project, and as such begins to shift the focus from analyzing what is taking place in our society to actually focusing on what legitimately would be said is the distraction. Racism is a distraction, but doesn't mean that it does not have impact. It does on the racialized group and in terms of the power structure that puts this racialization project. So it's a structural organizing principle, meaning that it organizes the resources of the society. It organizes the arrangement of the legal structure. It also organizes how the responses, who is included and who is excluded, who is to be targeted. And it also sits at the racial crossroads. So Islamophobia is a racialization project. Now, I know that often the question that Islam and Muslims are not a race, and that is accurate. But in here, we're missing or trying to identify skin color as the only marker for racialization, and it's not the case. Racialization and racial markers varies. Language could be a racial marker, skin color could be a racial marker, ethnic grouping could be a racial marker, and religion can be a racial marker. This is one way for us to understand anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a project of racializing the Jewish subject relative to their religious background, Judaism, and using it in a systematic way to target, and in essence led to all the way to the Holocaust. In the same way that Muslims were racialized in the initial project of formulating and forming what came to be Europe. To be a European, as Europe was crafted, was to be a white Christian that did not mix with Muslims and Jews. And this is where the whole notion of purity of blood, that be very clear, there's no such thing as pure blood, but this is the foundation of white supremacy, foundation for purity of blood. So again, we're dealing with racialization of the Muslim subject, or those who actually look or appear to be Muslims or in alliance with Muslim. And it is employed to rationalize and extend the dominant global power alignment. So in essence, it's a rearrangement of the political forces that have had dominated the political power structure, extending from the colonial period, settler colonialism, and all the way into the post-colonial period, including the Cold War. So it's again, it is to rationalize the extension of this dominant global power alignment, and it's engaging on embarking on a project for silencing the collective global other. Either you are into this new configuration of the global power alignment, or you are excluded, demonized, or ostracized, as well as being subject to the structural violence that is committed at this particular time. The other, I think, definition, which comes from Salman Sayyid's group and their work with the all-party parliamentary group in British Muslims, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslims. And so this is a very important definition. It touches into the present racial crossroads in terms of my work, but it also focuses specifically on racism, because we already have a structure for understanding racism and how to remedy it and engage in the whole subject of racism. And it also targets expressions of Muslimness, and again, or perceived Muslims. So some individuals who happen to be not Muslim, but they might look like Muslims or perceived Muslims. For example, the Sikh community, whether in the US or in parts of Europe, has been targeted for their perceived Muslimness. So again, these are two definitions, and I spend a little bit of time on both definitions because I think it's an important grounding to understand the type of research and work that has been done. Again, there are different schools of how Islamophobia is approached, and I think it's very important to understand this framing, which touches on race theory, but also on decolonial understandings relative to the phenomena that we speak of as Islamophobia. It's important as we engage in this subject is to think of theory of the state and Islamophobia. The racial state, the work of David Theo Goldberg, is very important. In here, the centrality of the role of the state in really shaping and articulating the racial structure. We are living in the Western world. We are still living in a racial state where we have an operative racial structure that is embedded in the system. It's been a constant effort to undo the racial state, but don't let the advertisement that we have reached into a colorblind society. What we reach to is that we are blinded by a lack of understanding of how race is embedded in every element of our society. And I know some people point to Martin Luther King speech, "I have a dream," as a way to frame the desire for a colorblind society where individuals are judged by their character. Again, that was Martin Luther King's dream in the March on Washington. But in 1967-68, Martin Luther King, specifically in the Three Evils of Society, spoke on the evil of racism, the evil of materialism, and the evil of militarism. And these are the three-headed monster that is still with us today. So when we speak about COVID-19 in the United States today, and also parts of Europe, one have to understand the racial dimension. You could say racial class dimension, but the racial dimension. And it is not surprising that the call to open the economy and get back into full operation was at the tipping point where we witnessed that the majority of those who have been infected and died as a result of COVID-19 in the United States, and you also in particular in the UK, were predominantly in the US African Americans, and then also minorities in general. And as such, this understanding that it is a virus that is basically an African American problem, and then we get into all types of racialized discourse to actually explain away the racial dimension. So race is that systematic process that causes death and destruction upon the racialized group. I wrote a piece that states that certificate or certificate of death should be written out, cause of death, black, meaning that skin color in the United States within the framework of a racial state causes death. And you could see from every element or every criteria that we look at that race is everywhere that we look, but we tend to actually speak of color blindness. If anything, we're blinded to the impact of racial discrimination and racism in the society. So I think it's important for us to think, is the state is the primary responsible agent, and it is the primary tool for the continuation of this racial structure. And it has a long history, and it's still with us till today. Moving to the populist politics, blame and scapegoating. And we could see this in the immediate discourse of COVID-19. The president has the penchant of constantly trying to say it's a Chinese virus, rather than it's a virus that happened Wuhan, China, but then moved to different parts in the United States. The strain that arrived to the United States arrived from Europe. But the use of the Chinese virus is trying to push and activate a long history of anti-Asian sentiment that is deeply rooted and has long roots in the United States. Even though it shifts, the Chinese at one point were deemed to be the racial target, moved to the Japanese being the racial target with the Japanese internment. Before that, the Chinese Exclusionary Act. Then they moved to the Koreans, moved to the Vietnamese, Cambodia, and so on. So these markers of who among the Asians is the legitimate target has fluidity. And in essence, what Trump is attempting is to activate a blame game. And he's been very apt from launching his campaign to actually use blame and scapegoating, blaming Muslims, blaming Latino immigrants, Mexican immigrants, using crime and all types of demonization, then using China and so on. So again, This is part of the blame and scapegoating. Also blaming Democrats for the initial period. And again, this is, I'm not speaking on what that the Democrats are favorable, but in general, that it was a Democrats that are pushing this virus. It's a hoax, and also that the media is basically amplifying and exaggerating the threat. And today we have 100,000 almost American dead, almost 1.6 million cases. And in essence, Trump has succeeded in shifting the blame and scapegoating. And now you have a major split in the society as a result of this. Then blaming immigrants. And that's why this is something that he carried all along from 2015 onward, but immediately also instituting a ban on immigration and increasing restrictions in the current period. Then in general, we could speak about Muslims in India and how this COVID-19 have activated the attacks on Muslims in India. And I'll speak later on about this, in essence, using the scapegoating and blame for the COVID-19. And then African Americans, and increasingly you find what I consider to be one of the lowest and despicable discourses that takes place, pointing that African Americans' health and lifestyle is basically the cause of their death. And in essence, one can say that to be poor is in itself produces a health condition. To be constantly poor produces a health condition. To be the recipient of 300 to 400 years of systematic racism, of enslaved conditions, to come into Jim Crow, to come to all types of exclusion and demonization. If you don't have a health condition, then really I would say that you have experience and possibly you have a miracle that is walking. But let us broadly speak about what this is in essence a blame and scapegoating that takes place on a regular basis. If you think about when African Americans get shot by the police, rather than actually ascertaining the facts of the case, finding out what was the motive behind the police shooting, was the person actually is a threat? Was he in any way armed and so on? All these should be the facts. Why actually the person was stopped in the first place while walking, walking while black, driving while black, just being in your home while black, playing video games is in itself constitute a threat. But what happens is that creating a pathology on the individual. So all of a sudden, you begin to dig and see whether the person actually was stopped by the police maybe 5-6 years ago. What type of record that they have? Were they expelled from schools? And again, if you already know that an African American person, almost 1 in 4, have already been entangled with the legal system as a part of what I consider to be the legal system industrial complex, because that's how our legal system works. So it begins to actually inhere the media, and those in political position are rationalizing, in essence, the shot that has been fired by the police. So I always say that it might be, or at least we could consider that the police officer had the gun in their hand, but let's be very clear that the bullets in that gun was actually provided by all those that are rationalizing. The media is providing the bullets, the political leadership is providing the bullets, and therefore the bullet that kills the person kills him once, but the discourse thereafter kills that person in our consciousness for the foreseeable future. And as you know, most often the legal system ends up exonerating the police, or exonerating standing your ground, or rationalizing, because to be an African American in the presence of any type of civil society space, you are deemed to be a threat. So again, as we speak about COVID-19, all these smart Alex that are coming out to speak about the health conditions and lifestyle of African Americans. And one can pose the question, let's say obesity. Now we understand the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, gave an accurate medical description of the president. So why is his weight problem is not seen as a health problem and does not produce the outcome? Also, we know that a large number of the American public, white, Latino, African American, and those in between, over 65% of them are obese. So why is it that the lifestyle of an African American becomes an exception, rather to understand that the reason that we have this impact of COVID-19 is a direct outcome of poverty, racism, neglect, lack of resources. And in essence, once you arrive to the hospital or you enter the hospital, basically your death certificate is being written. That is the reality, that poverty in America produces death, and those that are at the lower echelons of society, those at the margin, African Americans, Latinos, and minorities in general, are walking death certificates into many of the hospitals. And the media, in essence, begins to engage in a discourse to actually be the scribes that write the death certificate and fill it with meaning of meaningless as a result of this discourse. So again, this is for us in terms of understanding the blame and scapegoating that occurs. Then the other part is Palestinians in Lebanon. Initially, some of these discourses compared Palestinian refugees in Lebanon with COVID-19. And again, you have a long history in Lebanon of the antagonism relative to the Palestinians. You had a number of civil wars, or the major civil war in Lebanon, where the demographics of Palestinians were problematized in this sense. But positively, to say that people responded. Then the last, again, that science is no longer seen to be an arbiter. You could have your own scientist, right? So if you're gonna buy possibly Clorox and to cleanse your lungs, basically you have as valid of a scientific foundation for that as anything else. And if the president wants to take a drug that is made for another disease altogether, and you have individuals that will drink or attempt to drink cleaning solution because they felt that it is the right thing to do to support the president. And we no longer have, facts are no longer, having any standing. Basically, everybody have an opinion about facts, and you could actually bring your own facts, and increasingly those facts come from the internet. Even though that the individuals who are bringing these facts to discussion, possibly the last time they have attended an experiment, possibly was in kindergarten, and that's giving them much credit to this understanding. But this is the nature of populist politics, that it actually neutralizes, shifting the blame neutralizes the foundation of where we could actually take account of science and facts in order to guide the society forward. I want to shift to more to the right-wing populism, which dominates politics pre-COVID-19, because to understand what is taking place, one has to understand that we are living in a right-wing social populism across the globe, but politics is dominated by it. And right-wing populism constructs a binary worldview, it's us and them, packages people's real pain and suffering into blame and scapegoating, and a political figure offering simple solution to complex and systematic problems or systemic problems. Now, interestingly, you have Trump as a political figure. You have Boris Johnson in the UK as a political figure. You have Orban in Hungary as a political figure. You have Modi in India. So again, the populist figures that are dominating the political landscape pre-COVID-19, and they're going to impose their worldview, their distorted worldview in there. So they package people's real pain and suffering into blame and scapegoating. So Trump always blamed China, but he never actually blames, let's say, all the US corporations that move the jobs to China. You would think that the Chinese government or the Chinese corporate interests came out to the Pacific and the Atlantic and lassoed these corporations to come into China to set up their environmentally destructive manufacturing, their lead paint toys that are brought in, no labor laws, and so on. So again, it's an easy way tugging into blame and scapegoating. Now, when right-wing populists speak about the people, not all the people are included. Again, in terms of the United States in particular, you could say in some of Europe these days, it's white supremacy is the marker for the people or the national community. So not when they say the people or we are advocating for the people, they're only speaking of the marker of those who are included versus those that are excluded. Simultaneously, militarism is posited as the road to rescue the people. In the sense, and again, that what we need is to bolster and continue to expand and fund our military. And this is something that Trump constantly engaged in. Economic well-being for whites while blaming the other for pain and suffering. And again, in here is not to say that whites are not, have not been affected by economic downturn, whether 2008 or now the economic downturn that is taking place, even though that minimum wage workers, service workers, restaurant, construction, travel, hospitality, all these tend to be far more populated by minorities. But in general, in here, even among the pain, there is pain and there is more pain. So there is even a hierarchy of who actually gets to get the shorter end of the stick. And increasingly in here, to speak about the people, one has to decipher which people we are speaking about. So you are not included as a minority and as a racialized group within this frame. Now, it's also construct mental map to view the world, a kind of mental map through which individuals analyze and comprehend political reality. They are causing your pain and suffering, a binary worldview, friends and foes, good and evil, and one's purity against the corruption and immorality of the elite, from which the people must remain pure and untouched. So populism at the core of it prevents solidarity between different groups. So what is needed is a solidarity between whites, poor, middle class, African Americans, poor and middle class, Latino, poor and middle class, and a solidarity. And in essence, also to speak about those might be the upper echelon that will actually express and engage in solidarity. Populism, divide and conquer, divide and rule, and creates isolation. And you begin to actually see the other, not as a complement to your pain and suffering and your possibility of future horizon. You actually begin to be shaped in an antagonistic relationship. And this is what we're experiencing pre-COVID-19, and it's also is going to be more in the post-COVID-19 period. Now, right-wing populism is driven by global change that is rapidly altering the world that we are part of. The setting in of resentment politics, which has been in the making at least from the 1980s, focusing on immigration, intensifying anti-immigrant and xenophobic discourses, the presence or the increase in social fragmentation as a result of changes, global changes around us, militarism and violence. One has to say we spent about $7 trillion since 2001, September 11th, but also one can take it much earlier to the first Gulf War, to the end of the Cold War. So in the past 30 years, the United States has been on a hyper overdrive in using militarism and violence, which gets me also to that way often Muslims are asked to respond to violence. And I'm really often struck by completely even ignoring or having what you call amnesia about the violence that has been committed both by the United States and the Western world. I'll often mention in terms of just of the past 500 years to speak about the destructions and violences have been visited on the global south. So you speak about the Inquisition, the expulsion of Muslims and Jews, and the massive destruction, colonization, settler colonialism in the New World, and the destruction has been visited on native population and the indigenous communities in Australia and New Zealand, colonialism, settler colonialism in Africa, and what was visited in there, colonialism in India, in China, and forcing opium on the Chinese, again, courtesy of the British and their strategy. And then you speak about the violence being committed and continue to be committed in Africa. Then for people who really don't have a long history, possibly they need to maybe take a small booklet on the 20th century, need to remind them World War I is a Western engagement in violence on a mass scale never seen in the history of humanity. And then World War II, the one also with the Holocaust and the two nuclear devices, which is a mass violence at a scale unprecedented to be able to kill over 100,000 with the spark of one bomb. And then somebody stands up and gets the audacity to ask and pose the question about violence. So again, this is not to excuse and to defend any Muslim polity present on the past, but at least you need to actually line your ducks correctly before that questions get posed. But this tends to be the one that often Muslims are asked for and to respond. And then the role of the mass media and what destructive role that the mass media actually plays. We no longer have investigative journalism. We have opinion makers. We have influencers, whether social influencers or those that appear on the nightly news. So basically you'll have, really it's a type of an ongoing infomercial that is masquerading as a news and analysis and factual record. And you toss it from one influencer to the other, from one talking head to the other. And in the meantime, investigative, deep dig down, really challenging, the norm is no longer valued. And if you have the ability to give a 15-second quip, and if you're funny, then you made it to the upper echelon. Now you're inducted into the inner sanctum of mass media. So again, this is, I think, Chomsky's analysis that the role of mass media is to manufacture consent. It is exactly where are we. And in essence, it's also very cost effective to have an investigative journalism. To have a piece that is going to be substantial, you need some resources. You need a main journalist, a main investigative journalist. You need support staff. You need fact checkers. You have to have substantial infrastructure in there, and that is costly. So you move into the talking head phenomena, where you get a 1-minute report or a 15-second. You take what Trump says, you crunch few seconds of his speech. You get Boris Johnson few seconds, Macron few seconds of speech, and then you throw it for the next hours. One talking heads about speaking to another talking heads, and they're expressing its pure opinion conjuncture, and it drives sensationalism. So it leads, and in essence, this becomes the domain of mass media, and it actually thrives on it. So COVID-19, yes, there is mass media is engaging in this intensification, but we should not mistake the intensification with the fact that there is a presence of a problem called COVID-19 that has already killed about 100,000 people in here and thousands across the world. And again, the attempt to downplay and to say, oh, it's just a regular flu, it is this or this, it's people having high blood pressure or because they have obesity and so on. These are ways that we are still replicating the same argument. For anyone that is not aware of what this discourse about on an everyday life, the discussion about any of these items, did you think about these items before an aspect of mass media put it in there? When the president put on the new possible medicine to be used. Were you thinking about that and you entered into an opinion before, or you become part of this cycle of actually responding and being instigated to engage in discourse? Now we have a whole debate about the CDC, about conspiracy, and so on. So this becomes a realm of fragmentation, and the media plays a destructive role. I'm going a little bit on the mass media because its function has been overall destructive rather than instructive, and it is playing with people's emotion. Definitely, if you want to rank it, Fox News has been horrendous in this, even though that their news segment is far more responsible than their what I consider to be political ideologues that are pushing, in essence, are the mouthpiece for Trump rather than being the mouthpiece, or at least attempting to do investigative journalism. Just for us to understand where the war on terror before or during the period pre-COVID-19, which is still the same footprint. There are 76 countries that are affected by the aspect of the war on terror. There are 7 countries that are subject to air and drone strikes. There are 15 countries that have combat troops in it, 44 countries that have US military bases, and there's 58 countries training in counterterrorism. The US counterterror war involves 39% of the world countries. So again, this has to be understood. The pre and post-COVID is going to intensify possibly this scope of surveillance of state apparatus that directed at the war, countering the war on terror around the globe. It is actually a footprint of continued expansion of militarism around the globe. And domestically in the United States, the FBI says that the primary threat, domestic threat for the United States, is actually posed by white supremacist group and white militias. But nevertheless, the bulk of domestic surveillance is targeting Muslims. And in essence, Muslims are subject to hyper surveillance and monitoring. The joke actually during COVID-19, some Muslims sent out on social media calling for donations for the FBI agents that are no longer able to surveil the mosque because the mosques were closed. So they actually wanted to collect for them donations in sympathy. It's a joke, but it's actually absurdity reflects the theater. Actually, reality reflects the theater of the absurd. That it's understood that mosques are subject to hyper surveillance, and therefore, post COVID-19, the joke on Muslim social media is seeking donations for our FBI informant that are sitting in the mosque. It did not happen, but again, it's a joke. Now, COVID-19 and the imagined Muslim. And I want to go through the BBC number of posts, a number of front page articles by the BBC that actually makes you scratch your head. That from all the possible images to address COVID-19, it seems that the BBC, as well as others, and I'll go through these images, to say that the COVID-19 and the imagined Muslim, that the Muslim is present in almost every picture that was put on the front of newspapers and front of website. And I'm not the only one that pointed this out. There's been a conscious questioning, and a number of Muslims who wrote articles, a number also of journalists that have actually pointed this. So the front page, or the front of the BBC website on April 15th, 2020, had a group of Muslim women wearing a niqab, as the story is concerning Trump defunding the World Health Organization. So again, what was being implied? Now, one might think that maybe these Muslim women were actually observing the highest standard of protection for themselves and others. If you're concerned, there is a niqab ban in France, but there is also mandatory law right now to wear the face covering. So if you wear the niqab, you might be subject to a fine. But if you don't wear a mask, you're subject to a fine. So now you have women in niqab that in essence are possibly practicing the most protective level in relations to their status at this point. But the more important question, why is the selection of this paper by the editor, by the website editor, but more importantly, the BBC editor, why is this becomes the paradigmatic picture for the World Health Organization? One would think that maybe because the more appropriate picture would be to, again, to put a picture from Wuhan, because that's the Trump argument of defunding the World Health Organization is that they basically accepted the Chinese and are a front to the Chinese that they didn't take China to task. So why don't we actually put an image representing this, or maybe to have an image of the World Health Organization leadership, or the World Health Organization building, or the World Health Organization. So there's a variety of pictures. So in here, the choice, in essence, is a question that needs to be asked. And this is not an isolated image. In here, again, coronavirus social distancing enforced globally. So we have two Muslim women in hijab. Coronavirus update from the UK and around the world. So again, why is it that the mosque, you would think in the UK, you would possibly put maybe the Parliament, maybe Buckingham Palace, maybe one of the major squares in there, maybe the Big Ben Tower. So there's a variety of images to do that. And then around the world, again, this image appears of Muslims praying, not an exception. Then polluting gases fall rapidly as coronavirus spreads. And it's a woman walking in the street in hijab. Unless you say that a Muslim walking in a street basically can cause damage to the ozone layer. So I can't find what is the relationship in here. You know, again, if the question about what was the choice of these editors, and so far the research needs to be taken. I think there should be some survey that goes into these photo editors and maybe the top editors in BBC, New York Times, and others of what was at work in making these choices of these images. Again, others, again, the BBC again, Spain loosens restrictions and new infections slow. Again, I don't know. This is a woman in hijab. If in Spain, Muslim population in Spain is a minuscule, it does not even appear to be in any way such a substantial to say that the only image for Spain is a woman in hijab. You would think Barcelona would be where maybe you would actually possibly put those who want to go and watch the Barcelona's soccer team, and you put the Barca soccer team as the most important and significant aspect, or Real Madrid or something. It just is a puzzling. Why is this the choice? Borders shut as coronavirus cases rise. So again, borders closed, sports events are canceled as leaders themselves are quarantined. The image of a Muslim woman in hijab is the way that framed. Coronavirus cases near 1.5 million worldwide, a Muslim woman. So you would think that the only or the dominant engagement with COVID-19 is, or coronavirus is Muslims. In here, another one is March 18th, China's rampant consumption of exotic animals and lack of hygiene standard is far from above criticism. And long and behold, what we find is a Muslim woman as the only defining image relative to the China's rampant exotic animals. This is, for me, was one of the most puzzling pieces to look at in relations to coronavirus, specifically relative to China. And then European coronavirus cases and deaths climb. Again, it's a woman in hijab with hair covered. Now, if the case was about Europe, this is the high time where both Italy, especially northern Italy, and Spain were facing the onslaught of the coronavirus. And the images, again, would have been appropriate to have included images from Italy and Spain that does not, again, put Muslim as the paradigmatic image in association with coronavirus. So again, this is another element. Shutting down the Bondi Beach, and what we have is a picture of Muslims praying. Completely, again, what is the association between Muslims praying and the closure of Bondi Beach in this? And Hudayfa Shaqarat, actually, from the Twitter, I took this down, saying something weird is going. Some media outlets seem to make it a point to post pictures of Muslims with their articles, even if the picture doesn't necessarily correspond. So again, I said that I'm not the only one that's pointing out this, but this has been consistent. Now you also have CNN, so I don't want to leave BBC alone off the hook in here. CNN International. We have CNN. It's really uneasy situation for us. The head of an Italian cardiac surgery department said the coronavirus outbreak has forced his department to suspend operations to make room for coronavirus patients. Italian cardiologist says surgical department has been shut down. This is, and the image in there is actually of a mosque in Turkey. If you wanted to have a religious site to make the association, I would say the Vatican is down there. And there are many other churches in Italy. Again, I'm not trying to use a religious discourse, but again, it's very odd. This resulted in the Turkish embassy sending a message to CNN. It says, it's deplorable that CNN deliberately and insistently publishes photo from Istanbul in its coverage on COVID-19 development in US. CNN has to explain to its readers the logic of using picture of a mosque in Istanbul in news concerning visits to Congress or California prisons. So again, in here, it's completely California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation has announced. So again, this is in relations to California prisons, and yet the image is of a mosque. Now let me, play another role. If it's a free stock image, which often, as a person that sometimes engages trying to develop a flyer, a campaign, we'll try to look for stock images that we don't have to pay for because it's free. But an institution like BBC, CNN, you would think that they have thousands, if not millions, of photos that they have in their data drive or their hard drives, and they could have myriad of these photos that actually can immediately connect to the story. And even if they don't, just a mere tweet out by any of the CNN anchors or any of the CNN editors to the public, say, we would love for somebody to give us a photo about California prisons, and we'll give you, we'll tag you as a credit for that photo. I bet you there'll be thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that will actually send such images to CNN. So the selection is puzzling, and I will get into that, onto what I can read into it after we finish this. New York Times, likewise, so not to exclude CNN and BBC, US suspend most travel from Europe. And lo and behold, New York Times drops the mosque from Istanbul. US travel ban, Irish school closure, and more. It drops, again, BBC drops the image of the mosque from Istanbul, even though that the story is about Irish school closures and more. So what is the association? The pictures still appear. Now, interestingly, I was given the talk on May 22nd, and just as I was finishing putting together the PowerPoint, the article in my newsfeed is from Wall Street Journal. Coronavirus infections jump by more than 1 million in less than 2 weeks. Globally, there are more than 5.1 million recorded cases and more than 333,000 deaths. And what do we get is a mosque in Sofia, Bulgaria. Now, as far as I know, Bulgaria is not one of the most or the largest hit countries. You have UK, you have Italy, you have Spain, you have the United States, you have China, you have India, you have Iran. So you could actually put a image of Iran because they had a serious outbreak to point. So why is it this becomes the image that is there? So New York Times inclusion of Muslims. So 8 UK doctors died from coronavirus, all were immigrants. So in here, the doctors that died, we don't know they're all immigrants. So there is the Muslimness or the Muslim aspect is not included, even though that in here we mentioned he's Sudanese, but we don't get this. And then in Britain, almost 1/3 of doctors in National Health Service hospitals are immigrants. And then we get the image of the building. So again, the immigrants, they're present but erased. So in here, I would argue the whole erasure that takes place, and the inclusion is always in terms of negative association. So this is again, I would say is consistent, and I argue it's part of the epistemic of stereotyping that occurs. You are included in the story, but you actually are erased from the meaning that is in there. I tend to argue that many of us, in terms of the whole racialized discourse, we are in a theater piece about our own life, but we are supporting actors in it. Your role is to come in, offer the tea, not say a word, and then exit stage left, while those who are there speak for you in their own voice by claiming to actually speak your voice or your own words. So again, this is the structure of erasure. And there's a whole discourse, can a subaltern speak? But actually it's much more discourse that has to be undertaken into the systematic structural aspect to the silencing and the variety of ways that this actually takes shape. Now, Aljazeera's coverage actually pointed again it pointed to the death, the prayers, the Muslimness of the individuals, so on. So again, the picture is appropriate to the story, and mentioning again their background in here being Syrian. So again, the image in Al Jazeera coverage, and this is not to pit one or the other. We could critique Al Jazeera for other areas, but you could see in here that it was a focus on the story is related to both the picture and the image that is used. Similarly, outside of the mainstream, the Muslim news, the British Muslim doctors and nurses, first of their profession to die of coronavirus. So again, 3 Muslim doctors became first medics in UK to die from coronavirus. So you would think that the BBC, the CNN International, and other would actually lift this story, as well as put a focus on the images of those individuals that have lost their life in the front line, rather than associate, again, COVID-19 with Muslim spaces that in essence almost indicate some level of impact or some level of infections within the disease. Similarly, outside of the mainstream, they died fighting coronavirus. UK doctors from Sudan and Pakistan mourned. So the Middle East Eye focused on the individuals, gave us their name, their background, and also mentioned the articles where they appeared. So again, you could see there is a difference. There is an element of inclusion. I'm also a person that is very hesitant to engage in the discourse of humanizing subject. I argue, I wrote a piece called "Humanizing the Human is Dehumanizing," because when you are engaging in a humanizing discourse, the point of departure is the subhumanness of the individual that you are trying to humanize. And in doing so, you're actually trying to use yourself as the point of departure. So in essence, becomes that you're trying to actually get them to be akin or reflective of who you are culturally, socially, politically, religiously, and so on. So it becomes that you actually are humanizing them into the Eurocentric epistemic rather than actually allow them to speak from their point of departure. And this is again raises the whole question that when the subalterns speak, or the Muslim, can a Muslim speak? Are they speaking with their own voice? Are they speaking their own words? Are they able to disagree and they are able to speak where they actually, their words have an impact? Rather than, again, bringing the individual to speak, but to speak the words that actually comfort you, here using you metaphorically, and in essence giving you the word that satisfies your, quote, fear of the other that you constructed yourself. And in essence, in here, they're not speaking because it's only a reflection of your own feeling of insecurity, racialization, and targeting of the individual. So it becomes almost a circular discourse within your own self. So I'm very critical of the whole discourse of humanizing the human. I find it to be a dehumanizing act. Without really saying that people can engage on a human level, they do, but where is that point of departure is important. I'm a very strong critic right now. There is a whole discourse, what is called interfaith dialogue, that is really rooted rather than into an arrival at an understanding. It is really crafted around confirming and affirming these epistemic of stereotyping, of racialization, of dehumanization, but using religious texts or the discourse around religious texts to do so. So I wanted just to be careful that we don't miss that point and begin to say that this coverage humanize the subject. For me, that's a problematic discourse. It points that the subject, him or herself, are located in the subhumanist epistemic that needs to be challenged. Now, in India, which is interesting, I said I'm going to point out that in India, jihadism and COVID-19 were framed together, and even the Maldives is threatened by jihadism and COVID-19. So now in India, you had a discourse around love jihad, the whole attack on beef eating, Muslims, so on. So now the linguistic shift is that COVID-19 jihad, and there's a number of cases that we could point to, and in here, just to drop a little bit on, I think these two slides were in misorder, but Trump actually retweeted Paul Sperry's tweet. He says, let's see if authorities enforce the social distance orders for mosques during Ramadan, like they did churches during Easter. Now, let's be very clear, the government actually set up the guidelines, so it's actually Trump himself is the one who set the regulation with the CDC on what needs to be done in Easter, and then critiquing the authorities in relation to Ramadan. Again, Muslims have closed the mosque, not because Trump or Paul or anyone. It is in the best interest of the community. Public health and public safety and the well-being of individuals is utmost in the consideration. But Paul Sperry is a conspiracy theorist. His books are there. They feed into this conspiracy about Muslims infiltration, taking over of America, and he is one of those individuals that basically linked Obama to everything. Now, just to be clear, Paul Sperry and his ilk, Islamophobic ilk, believe that Obama is connected to this worldwide conspiracy of Muslim Brotherhood. Now, if Obama is part of this conspiracy, you have to give it to them to bring a Kenyan here in the United States, to scope a white woman, to impregnate her, to give birth to a child, then to escape, to exit from the scene, so the conspiracy of Superman being brought to America can actually develop. Then they ushered out of the mainland to Hawaii, out of the national security enterprise for the child to grow. Then he's like Star Wars. You take him to Yoda to be in I think in Indonesia or Malaysia. So he would be trained as a Yoda in the Islamic understanding. Then he comes in there, comes back to the United States, finds his way through a conspiracy theory of Clark Kent, and makes it to Harvard again in order for him to move up, becomes a respectable legal scholar and professor, and then actually before that goes to Chicago, becomes a community activist, an organizer, social organizers, Harvard Law School, marries Michelle Obama as another lawyer, and then the conspiracy makes its way and they take over the White House. So this is again what you're dealing with, and this is at the foundation of Trump's ideology relative to Islamophobia, that begins to be the rallying point for the Tea Party, for the birther movement. And just a few weeks back, he still speaks about the crime of Obama. Let me just be on a side comment. I would have to say that Obama owns him, because Trump really can't handle that he is not even a second string. He is not even on the bench when it comes to Obama's, to his intellect, to his engagement, to his sophistication. And again, I oppose Obama's policies. I oppose his engagement with militarism, oppose his policies on the economy. But setting all that aside, just on Obama being an African-American, the first African-American, that resulted in the wide backlash that fed and brought us Trump into the White House. And Paul Sperry is essentially is that at the foundation or at the crux of this conspiracy theory. And Trump actually tweeted his work. His book, I wouldn't even put them in the recycling pen. Is an insult to the recycling pen. The recycling pen is useful. It actually, you could recycle it and create more content. But that's, again, Muslims and religious freedom. And increasingly this discussion about religious freedom and whether closing the mosque and religious institutions violates religious freedom in the United States. I was very clear that the highest priority for Muslims and religious leaders is to make sure the health and well-being of the worshippers. It's, you could say that you have to be alive to worship God. It does not help you or the church or the mosque or the synagogue if you're dead to actually, we will pray upon you a funeral service, but in essence, you have to be alive, and religion flourishes with many worshippers being alive and walking through the doors when it is safe and secure. But again, the discourse is politically motivated at this point. NYT and fake news. This is the fake news relative to a possible scuffle breaks inside a police van. Now, this was attributed to being in New Delhi, but it actually has nothing to do in New Delhi. This was something in Bombay much earlier than this incident, and it has nothing to do with COVID-19, but social media deployed this and used it as a way to frame Muslims and to say that they're responsible for spreading COVID-19. So populist politicians, populist parties in India and other places are utilizing COVID-19 as an excuse to shift the blame and intensify their already constructed political priorities and political campaigns. So we're gonna. I will share this for people to watch it at another video. Other images also from India, video of a Sufi ritual that also was used as a way to a ritual of licking spoons, utensils. This is unrelated to the COVID-19, but is actually placed that all these Muslims are licking the spoons that people are going to use in order to intentionally actually infect individuals. So what we are seeing is association between particular actions that is unrelated, have no connection to COVID-19, is used in this sense to intensify the targeting and blaming of Muslims. The last image is of Trump in his press conference when he was asked regarding his retweeting of Paul Sperry. He said, "I spoke with leaders and people that love mosques." And I'm trying to find out who are these leaders and people who love mosques. I've seen a great disparity in this country. And then he shifts, "I've seen a very strong anti-Israel bent in Congress with Democrats. The things that they say about Israel are so bad, and I can't believe it. I just had to call, I had a call with imams. I don't know what happened with our country, but the Christian faith is treated much differently than it was. And I think it's treated very unfairly." So the question was about mosques and the retweet. So he immediately deployed a quick shift to speak about Israel. And for the life of me, I don't know what the connection is. But again, this is one of the long-standing litmus tests for Muslims, is basically you have to articulate your support for Israel in order to be included. So again, the inclusion has certain markers, and one of these markers is that, again, are you supportive of Israel or not, rather than whether you're supportive of US Constitution and your rights as a citizen. So this is, again, a common refrain that engages the Muslim subject on a litmus test relative to their standing on Israel, without actually thinking Israel is actually in violation of international law. It has constituted an apartheid system that is operable, continue to expand settlements, violating Palestinian rights as we speak, destructions of homes on a daily basis, shooting Palestinians. But again, the president resorts to this strategy as a silencing strategy for the retweet, which is from a major Islamophobic figure, and also try to shift the blame in this way. Now, let me conclude with the following. That Islamophobia in the age of COVID-19 pandemic will intensify as we move forward into the 2020 election, which is the next 4+ months. We will be witnessing one of the most intense period possibly of the president unleashing a rabid succession of Islamophobic content. He will connect this Islamophobic content to his relations and his defense of Israel, which hasten and push forward for the annexation. That's one issue. The second, we will also witness Trump using the Chinese, quote, Chinese virus, blaming China. And again, this is not a defense of China. One can take issue with the Chinese government, but he's utilizing anti-Chinese, anti-Asian discourse. And we already witnessed a massive spike in anti-Chinese and anti-Asian sentiment, violence being committed on them, defacing their properties, attacking some of their stores. So the Islamophobes and racists never miss an opportunity to assert their racism or the right to be racist as we speak. So we're going to find that Trump is going to utilize anti-Asian, in particular anti-Chinese, and connect it both to the COVID-19, but the broader economic weakness that we will be faced moving forward. And then the third, he will be engaging in a discourse around African Americans, knowing that Biden have already messed up a number of times, and it's going to be a fair game. Both on the one hand, try to problematize the African American community and you, while simultaneously trying to court them on a number of issues. So you're going to see some of this discourse, and then the ever-present anti-immigrant toolbox that will be there, blaming Mexicans, blaming Latinos, trying to insinuate their violence, their drug trade and cartel and so on. So he's going to have all these elements. Now, speaking of these, I would argue that what Trump is resorting is to an already existing reservoir of latent Orientalism, latent Islamophobia, in order to push for manifest Orientalism, manifest Islamophobia. So again, what we're going to see is that imagery. I argue that latent Islamophobia can explain all the images that we saw in the newspapers, in the BBC, in various websites, including what we saw in CNN. There is an operative social imaginary informing the latent Islamophobia that then actually get to be the implemented or the outcome into manifest Islamophobia. And we're going to see those in essence. So there's a whole set of issues that actually are deployed, especially in election cycles, crime, drug, law and order, national security, Muslims, and so on, and otherizing all these different groups in order to fragment the various elements of the society while consolidating a base moving forward into the election. So hopefully I touched on a number of issues. I know that I went a little bit over my allotted time, but there were much material that I collected to put forth. And hopefully I look forward to your questions and engagements on this important topic. I know that we have a Tuesday 1 o'clock gathering for the discussions with the presentation. So thank you for listening, and thank you for actually giving me the opportunity to put the issue of Islamophobia in the age of COVID-19 pandemic into the discussion, and look forward to healthy and well-articulated responses on Tuesday. Okay, thank you.